But to be back, it's also really surreal that 4 of my dissertation committee members are here, so I'm getting really nervous for the grad students here that I'm like, oh, please let me pass. But yeah, so very proud RTF alum. This is, as when I mentioned, this is part of a larger book project that's been in the works for about 5 years. It's currently under contract with the University of Texas Press with Tom's series there, and so we are so close to getting this this manuscript submitted. And so this is a project that I've been thinking about for a while. It came out of my first book when I was interviewing executives in international offices of the Hollywood studios who were in Europe and Latin America, and I was just really interested in the fact that the majority of people I was talking to were middle-aged white men, and it did not matter what country I was in. And so I kept thinking about, okay, where are all the women working in these Hollywood studios, even the international offices? And so this was just a question that just kind of kept coming up and up and up again. And this is where this book project came from. So I'm really interested in the barriers that female-driven films face being made in Hollywood and the global industry at large, but the book mostly focuses on Hollywood. I'm interested in the fact that, so I define female-driven by movies that are directed, produced, and or written by women, that have women in front of the camera, as well as that are targeting female audiences. So the question I have in this research, and as the book says, I'm looking at kind of different sectors of the filmmaking pipeline, is how value is constructed and how it's circulated. And so how value is so often gendered in these ways, how risk and financial risk is gendered. And I'm looking at these barriers on a structural level, but also on an individual level. So I spent about 5 years interviewing women who worked above the line, but also in other sectors of the film industry. So looking at folks in development, film festivals, in distribution. And yeah, so today I'm going to talk about film festivals. This is one of the chapters from my book. And I'm really interested in how value is being conveyed, constructed, how it circulates within major international film festivals, and how it's really like reflecting the ecosystem of the film industry. All right, so I'm a little rusty with this. So I'm going to be reading and showing y'all images. Okay, so thinking about this, kind of my overall argument from this chapter of my book that I'm thinking about for film festivals is that they're increasingly emerging as sites of kind of struggle and mediation for the gender parity debates that we're seeing around the industry worldwide. And so the book chapter is very much being, I'm pulling from fieldwork and interviews that I did at the Cannes Film Festival in Toronto, Berlin, and Sundance. However, today I'm just going to talk about the Cannes Film Festival. So just kind of that's my object of comparison today. I'm going to kind of talk about the International Film Festival as a business in general. I'm going to move on to kind of talking about the programming, awards, as well as marketplace and how that kind of operates. And then finally, I'm going to kind of wrap it up and talk about, okay, what's been happening in the post-Me Too Time's Up era since 2018, particularly at Cannes. So thank you, and let's get started. All right. So each May, the glitz and glamour of the global film business descends upon a small resort town of the French Riviera. A mix of film professionals from stars and filmmakers to journalists and studio executives convene at one of the most prestigious and exclusive industry events of the year, the Cannes Film Festival. American producer Christine Vachon recounts the importance of film festivals, particularly to independent filmmaking, in her memoir, and this quote is great. The whole world is at Cannes. There are other film festivals and markets, of course, and most often the festival you take your film to is dictated by when your movie's done. If you finish in winter, you submit it to Cannes. If you finish in fall, you try for Berlin. Spring or summer, you submit it to Venice, end quote. So these kind of beloved international directors premiere their latest films, distribution deals are made, announced, opening night films kind of feel like a wild card when it comes to Cannes, because you may get something that's like prestigious French drama, but you also may get like a third installment of a franchise like Shrek. You should see those pictures. So Vachon herself has brought multiple films to Cannes with her collaborator director, Todd Haynes, most recently the Velvet Underground documentary. So world premieres attract everybody. So it is kind of like the entire commercial trade press, everything's kind of like focused on Cannes for that like 10 days, 10, 12 days in May. So my goal for this is that to build upon this really robust field of film festival studies that's been emerging over the past couple of decades. But my perspective is coming from a critical media industry studies approach through methods and kind of critical questions I'm asking about power structures and how industry practices and things like that. So film festivals have been, hold on. It was working. I knew one of these, oh, there we go. Okay. So as early as Venice in 1932 and in 1946, film festivals have long operated as this complex geopolitical, economic, and cultural site for the international film business. As film festival scholars often describe, early European festivals evolved this kind of Olympic-style display promoting national cinema into international networks of festivals. So they serve this kind of distinct set of audiences, traditions, perspectives, cultures. So festivals grew over the past century. They have moved into spaces all around the world, different sizes, different audiences. Most famously, like Berlin, known as Berlinale, London, Carlo Vivari in the 40s and 50s, into Hong Kong, and different North American festivals, Toronto and Sundance in the 70s, Shanghai, Busan beginning in the 90s. So we have film festivals happening in all these regional markets around the world. Major international festivals they're powerful institutions, something that can't be. This is very strange. We're just going to do this. Here we go. They are powerful institutions, tastemakers, platforms for discovering, vetting, and promoting emerging voices or reinforcing already powerful cinematic voices. So the International Federation of Film Producers Associations, they're the ones who actually accredit these the festivals. So they would like signify that like Cannes, Venice, and Berlin are the top tier international festivals, that they're based on their size, attendees, competitiveness, things like that. So due to their prestigious competition categories, they're known as like the big three, or what is colloquially known as the A level, but nobody actually calls it A level. It's just like kind of everybody calls it A level. Yeah. And so individually, festivals operate as their own ecosystems, their industry gatekeepers at large in their own way. As a network, all these top festivals are an annual circuit where the films move along other smaller regional festivals. And they're part of a global marketplace that encompasses all phases of filmmaking, so from financing to exhibition. For emerging to established filmmakers, acceptance into major international festivals is hyper-competitive. As a film premiere at one of these exalted events has the potential to launch or boost somebody's career. So a film premiere may lead to a distribution deal. They'll benefit from critical or industry press coverage, and the potential exists for career-making networking opportunities. Because women have historically been marginalized or been so pushed aside in terms of programming and participation in these festivals, it's only kind of helped to further the gap, particularly for Hollywood filmmakers, but women around the world. In recent years, festivals have approached this kind of swelling pressure to hire, program, and support female filmmakers very, very differently. So my book chapter talks about like the different festivals, Sundance, Cannes, Toronto, and to some extent Venice as well, how they've handled this pressure for gender equity very, very differently. And it ranges from like being dismissive deniability, they have any implications in this, to actually really trying to think about inclusive ways to program and change from the inside out. For today, the case of Cannes offers a striking example of how the film festival has emerged as a site of struggle, a site of battle, or a battle site having gender parity debates and activism on a global scale. So business-oriented festivals serve a variety of stakeholders and are spaces in which filmmakers, distributors, publicists, programmers, I'm going to keep going, policymakers, critics, journalists, corporate sponsors, local businesses, and people just attending, like all these people. So there's a lot of stakeholders, a lot of people involved who have different priorities going to these big film festivals. They all kind of intermingle. The business festival is a category that Mark Branson has designated is distinct from smaller community-supported audience festivals. Those are like perhaps something more like the Austin Film Festival, which is most likely catering to a local audience to some extent. You may have different kind of seasonal volunteer staff for these types of events, and it supports filmmakers from the local to international level. So the industry business side is doing something a little bit different, although there can be a mix. So like Toronto's kind of a mix of audience focused and industry focused. Sundance is definitely an industry festival, but you can, like, anybody can buy tickets if they can afford to get to Park City. Or as we saw with the virtual event recently, $20 a ticket, you can watch from your home. So Cannes is a business-oriented festival catering to industry delegates with a strict accreditation process, and it's largely closed to the public. So it's like this really kind of odd, atypical example of a film festival. The exclusivity is central to its institutional brand and cultural capital that it accrues for the films selected. So as a platform supporting French language and international art house films, Cannes has long served as a launchpad for auteur-driven, primarily male auteur-driven selections. So after running the Palme d'Or festival, top festival films like Bong Joon-ho's Parasite, Ruben Östlund's The Square, Michael Haneke's Amour, Terrence Malick's Tree of Life, they each played other prestigious festivals, then would go on to win awards as part of a big seasonal campaign. So that's pretty much well-known, right? Path. So at the same time, Cannes has cultivated a long, cozy relationship with Hollywood as well. So at the same time, you may have these like international art house films or smaller films coming. You also will have, as I mentioned before, like they woo the A-list stars. The red carpet and the attraction and the having the press there is very, very important for this festival, for their institution, as well as kind of reinforcing the brand. And so the annual program list can include anything from Hollywood fare, like big budget projects. In 2001, Shrek, Robin Hood in 2010, Universal, Sony's Da Vinci Code, yes, that was a Cannes, and Warner Brothers' The Great Gatsby 2013, as these are all opening night selections. So there's a lot of stuff going on there and a lot of different audiences and a lot of different priorities at play. As Dinah Aradinova argues, quote, like most cultural phenomena, film festivals are multifaceted and riddled with inherent contradictions, end quote. So one of the most glaring tensions in the position of women at Cannes, the thing that I noticed when I was going there were the women are visible. They're visible in the marketing. They're in the posters. So one from 2009 to 2019, the marketing materials and film program offer two perspectives of a woman's place in this festival space and in the industry at large. One from visibility, other from absence. So on one hand, for 8 of the 10 years, the annual festival's official posters prominently featured female stars. From Juliette Binoche here in the bottom to Marilyn Monroe, images of primarily white and American European actresses have graced giant posters that hung above on the Palais and above the main theaters, as well as posters throughout the city. A notable exception was the one you saw at the very beginning from 2019 that commemorated French filmmaker Agnes Varda. On the other hand, as indicated in the list of selected films inside each year's program, for more than 7 decades, the festival has almost exclusively showcased male filmmakers. So during this 10-year period, when I was looking at these posters, female directors never made up more than 20% of the films in competition category and routinely made up less than 15%. So whether commercial Hollywood genre fare or smaller character-driven state-supported European art cinema, the majority of films that are screened at Cannes are directed by men, or as New York Times' Manola Dargis contends, who's covered Cannes quite a bit, she says that it represents the, quote, grand temple of the male auteur. So the festival came under scrutiny in the 2010s to improve the rates of acceptance for female-directed films. Not surprisingly. So for those in competition for the film's festival's juried awards, including the most exalted prize, the Palme d'Or, there's been a lot of pressure for that specific area. So in 2012, the French feminist collective Le Beard published an open letter in the French newspaper Le Monde to the Cannes Film Festival. And they admonished the then leadership, the president and the director general, Thierry Frémaux, that the organization's male-driven culture was not including, that had not included one female-driven film that year in 2012. And they warned in this letter, public that was circulated widely, quote, above all, do not let girls imagine that they might one day have the audacity to direct movies and go up the steps of the Palais, which is the main complex where the festival is held, other than on the arm of Prince Charming, end quote. So an online petition circulated featuring prominent filmmakers, scholars, and activists, but in the following years, little inclusion efforts were made by the festival. So after that 2012 kind of push, very public push, in the in-competition category had 1, 2, 3 at the most between 2013 and 2018, female-directed films. So programming for major international festivals like Cannes it's more complicated than just like plucking things, you know, like it's not this meritocracy and it's not something that's like, you're just kind of scheduling the best of the best or what's being submitted. As Jeffrey Ruff contends, quote, programming, however, is not a matter of the festival directors simply choosing the films they want to show. Even the most powerful European festivals, Cannes, Venice, Berlin, and North American festivals, Toronto, and to lesser extent Sundance, engage in delicate negotiations with filmmakers, distributors, and sales agents to secure the rights to premiere new works. So many of these decisions are made on premiere and release strategies for each of the stakeholders involved. So it's not just the festival, but it's the actual producers, it's the distribution companies, it's has a lot to do with like award season, when they're going to get theatrical distribution. Echoing a number of the film festival scholars, Marike de Valk and Mimi Soderman identify a central function of the film festival as, quote, a gateway to cultural legitimization. So that's part of it as well. Thomas Elsesser's categorized festivals as, quote, an apparatus that breathes oxygen into individual film and reputation of its director as a potential auteur. But at the same time, it breathes oxygen in a system of the festival as a whole, keeping the network buoyant and afloat, end quote. So major festivals confer on the value of these selected films and filmmakers while reinforcing the prestige of their own brands, their own powerful positions, and their own institutions. So after increased pushback for the lack of women programmed in the competition, okay, we fast forward a couple of years to 2015. So festival organizers unofficially announced 2015 as the year of the woman. I have a whole part of my distribution chapter about the cycles of like the year of the woman. Yeah, women go to the movies, all this. So like this is happening here. When the festival awarded Agnes Varda her honorary Palme d'Or, she became only the second woman ever to win this award. Does anybody know the first one? Tom knows, that's cheating. Is Jane Campion. Yeah, Jane Campion. Yep. So even though that year they had more women in competition, including Valerie Donzelli's Marguerite and Julian, Mawin's Monroe, they secured spots in the competition category. This was also the year that Mad Max came out and it premiered at Cannes and it had a lot of attention, and Variety was calling it the testosterone jolt with a feminist twist. I love that movie, but the way that they're counting like progress, and I say that in quotes, this year is fascinating. So what also happened this year was a little, what we call, they were calling it like a micro scandal. So female attendees, at the same time that it's the year of the woman, female attendees navigated the festival space often have, when they're going to the in competition screenings in the Lumiere Theater, which is the big theater, and they go up the red carpet, and it's only the evening premiere screenings, they have to be in formal attire. I have done it myself. You have to, and they will, if you are not dressed the way you're supposed to be dressed, if you don't have the right shoes on, the very like posh French security guards who all have the same suits every day will kick you out of line. So it happens. And so this is something that's really different about Cannes, because it's this festival that is very formal in like one particularly really rigid way when it comes to competition. So like Andre Bazin has humorously written about this in the 50s, comparing the ritual of attending the festival as donning formal attire and attending extravagant premieres to the pomp and circumstance of a religious order, which it very much feels like. So a troupe of serious, impeccably suited male festival security guards strictly enforce the dress code. Nothing can prepare a first-time female attendee at Cannes for the critical gaze of these gentlemen as they ascend the red carpet past bleachers of like a wall of press for an evening premiere. So a small scandal grabbed the fleeting attention of trade headlines and social media coverage when security denied entry into the premiere of Carol, directed by Todd Haynes, to a woman wearing flats and another one wearing sandals. In response, there was a Twitter dust-up. It's 2015 that ensued. I don't know if y'all were on Twitter the summer of 2015, #Heelgate, #Flatgate. The incident served as another example of tension between the masculine festival culture clashing, even undermining the organization's publicly facing PR stance that year of the year of the woman, that's like celebrating their presence while at the same time like policing and as well. So the artistic director, and this is something that I'm still kind of digging into in terms of leadership in like kind of like A-level festivals versus other festivals. They are these kind of stars in their own right, and so they're in the media. They're the mouthpieces, the PR. They speak publicly and represent these festivals. So if you look at the top tier American and European film festivals, before 2020, male artistic directors led every single one. And in addition to creative decision-making roles and overseeing festival programming committees, the directors are really the public face. And they are very much the most visible power role coming out of the festival from externally. So 2 widely circulated discursive strategies have been used by Cannes and other leadership of these festivals to kind of deflect all this criticism they're getting about gender inequity. And these are going to sound really familiar to you because they were coming up in other parts of my book and other parts of the film industry. So the first is Cannes general delegate in the middle, Terry Fremont, has claimed, quote, a lack of quantity of films directed by women to choose from. It's gonna be like that old song you've heard again and again. So he told Screen Daily in 2016 that, quote, what percentage of filmmakers in the world are women? According to a recent report, it's like 7%. So I've been saying this for years now, but what you see in Cannes is a consequence, not a cause. More needs to be done in film schools, the universities, and the production houses to favor women, and then you're going to see results, end quote. So a similar interview a couple years later, we have Alberto Barbara, who's the head of Venice, has a similar opinion and blamed the film industry pipeline for wider spread gender disparities across festival programming. The problem lies in, quote, he calls the beginning of the chain, not the end of the chain. Something that's out of our hands. And so you're hearing this again and again from the major festivals that this is not our problem. We are not implicated in this. The second excuse for inequitable programming numbers blames on the, quote, lack of quality in the submissions from the women directors. Fremont told Variety in 2018 that if programming the first or the second films of young female directors, quote, if I did that, I wouldn't be doing them a favor by putting their films in competition. It can be very harsh, end quote. So the implicit argument is that they're not ready to be filmmakers to be like shown on this scale, that they can't compete with other submissions. And the thing is, the few female filmmakers who are accepted during this period, they often have a long relationship with Cannes. So you're having a situation where they're already been vetted, they're already established. They are, as what IndieWire journalist Kate Erblin pointed out, quote, it's telling that each of the women selected to compete with their latest works have been to Cannes before. They're festival approved, which means they can, the festival can tout an increased female filmmaker visibility without making visible the filmmakers who need it most. Rising stars, fresh names, new talent, end quote. So for example, like in 2017, the 3 women that were in competition were American director Sofia Coppola, who's been there multiple times, Japanese director Naomi Kawase, and Scottish director Lynn Ramsey. And so they all had at least one film's screened before. So when I asked female filmmakers so I'm interviewing women, a lot of them based in LA, some in Midwest, some in New York. I have a group of about 8 to 10 that I've been talking to on and off for every 6 to 9 months over the past couple of years, as well as a larger pool. And so I often talk about like film festivals with them at some point, like the importance of that, how that's impacted your career. And one producer who'd also been a programmer at Sundance, we've been talking this summer when all this was happening, all this circulation in around 2018 in the trades where they're basically saying this is not our problem. And she told me, quote, what bullshit. They don't have the numbers because they're just programming on so-called quality. And if these two things are mutually exclusive, and as if these things are mutually exclusive. And I have a really big issue with 1, not doing the work of looking for films by women, and then 2, weighting the films as being less than films directed by men. I find myself trapped in that conversation over and over and over again. So, end quote. In an attempt to minimize the responsibility of festivals, such narratives about lack of quality are a blatant deflection tactic intended to silo the organization's role from the commercial filmmaking pipeline at their convenience. It's striking that the public statements of these institutional leaders deflect the festival's role as a gatekeeper. Structural inequities in other areas of the filmmaking pipeline are compounded, and they don't absolve the festival sector of its role as a powerful platform for distribution and exhibition. So the barriers to access for training, development, production phases disproportionately derail women filmmakers. It's a harsh reality and at the core of the book project I'm working at. Yet these dismissive comments act like these different sectors are not related and interdependent. So yes, these dismissive comments allow festivals to separate themselves from the rest of the film industry in ways that are just not accurate, and it's just not how it works. Let's see. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. We could definitely talk about awards. So the juries, we have the 2018 jury. Kate Blanchett was the president of this jury. Very few women have been jury presidents in the past 20 years. I think maybe like 2 or 3. You do have occasionally a few women on the jury. These are the ones who are giving the Palme d'Or. So you're having a whole other like vetting. So once you're selected in competition, then you're being vetted. And so and as we've seen, only like 2 women have ever gotten the Palme d'Or, 3 honorary, if you get the honorary, as well as, So these festival selections and awards are kind of like another layer to it, in addition to the programming, that that really do have real world implications for the entire global distribution cycle of these films. So symbolic value creation and the cultural legitimization come with the West Festival Awards. And in turn, they bring financial gains, they distribution deals, future opportunities that women just are not getting in the 2010s. So festivals and organizations absolutely have significant resource controlling relationships in the media industries. What Joseph Turow describes as power roles, film festivals exist as a linking pin across production, distribution, exhibition between you can see the different kind of booths and film industries from around the world that are being represented. Okay, so what's happened since Me Too? This is like a very brief. So since Me Too, Time's Up have evolved. So in May 2018, in the charge moment, you may or may not remember, if y'all were like really, I think people who are really into film festivals are like a really special group. Like it's like our sports. Like what got picked, what's got picked up, like what got distribution. It's a lot. So in this moment, this is the May after Me Too, the fall of 2017, and all eyes were on the Cannes Film Festival with global attention on the French Riviera. 82 women marched together in an unprecedented red carpet protest led by the year's jury president, actress Kate Blanchett. You can see her there in the groups. The group included fellow jury members Ava DuVernay, Kristen Stewart, and other high-profile folks, writers, producers, directors, actors, agents, distributors. Most notably, Agnes Varda was in the group as well. So she's only one of the filmmakers, the only female filmmakers of the in the French New Wave, and has her honorary Palme d'Or. So the group stood in this kind of march, quietly, silently, it's like a silent march, marched up the steps, and this is this red carpet that goes in the Lumiere Theater where all the main and competition gala fancy premieres happen. So they stood atop the Palais and to protest gender inequity in the global film industry. So the 82 kind of represented, symbolized the number of female directors that premiered films at Cannes since 1946. So since 1940, between 1946 and since 1946 and 2018, 82 women directors, their films had been accepted in Cannes, compared to 1,688 male counterparts. So together, Blanchett and Varda gave a statement that included, quote, "We will demand that our workplaces are diverse and equitable so that they can best reflect the world in which we actually live. And a world that allows us behind and in front of the camera to thrive shoulder to shoulder with our male colleagues," end quote. So in one of the most visible sectors of the global filmmaking industry, this red carpet space, protesters aim to call attention to this historic erasure and devaluation of women's labor and contributions in the film industry. Like this is like the peak of when this is kind of happening at film festivals, was 2018. So despite the seeming spontaneity of this moment, against the backdrop of a deeply formal and ritualistic festival, in reality, the Cannes Women's March results from years of international organizing and activism. In coordination with the French collective 50/50, you can see their logo there. The march emerged following the hashtag 50/50 by 2020 movement. So trying to get equity at festivals, half and half, by 2020. The movement originated in the transnational dialogue. These seeds were planted years earlier in informal and formal industry panel discussions, meetings at festivals like Cannes and TIFF. I was seeing remnants, or like I was seeing like seeds of this in Toronto, in a press event at Cannes. Like I was watching this kind of happen in like since the early 2010s, and this is kind of the culmination of it. So, for example, you have like a leading policy activist and former CEO of the Swedish Film Institute, Anna Sterner, was a central public figure in this, and she used festivals as this kind of platform to do that. So she was calling attention about inequity at Cannes, but also in film festivals. Her and her Film Institute colleagues actually changed policies in Sweden and became one of the first countries in Europe to have more equitable financing policies. So she first announced the Swedish Film Institute's their own initiative for 50/50 at a Cannes press conference in 2013. One of the first to happen is as part of this momentum. She quote said that things had started to move in 2015, but the gender parity movement was still new. It was still not getting attention. They were still really nervous about trying to get people to go. So they had organized another bigger panel in 2016 that actually ended up earning quite a bit of attention and turned Cerner into this star of this kind of movement within the film festival circuit. So she started being invited to all these festivals and giving talks about how they did in Sweden and how they could do it elsewhere. I mean, it's a state-supported film industry that's smaller. There's a lot of different variables and dynamics here in Sweden, but it's definitely a part of, kind of shows the transnational conversation that was happening. So this movement coalesced in 2018. She's actually in the crowd somewhere. And as this march was happening, a number of the top tier festivals were having to kind of grapple with this. There was this kind of social media and data-driven pressure. Time's Up was a part of this too, along with state-run film agencies and institutional, various film institutions. So the goal of the march was calling attention to the programming at this festival, but also to push them to sign what they called the Programming Pledge for Parity and Inclusion. Oh my gosh, one of these. So you see up right at the top, there's Terry Fremont with some of the women as part of this movement, as well as jury members, after he signed the pledge. So festival directors were invited, it's a voluntary commitment, to release data on film submissions and program selections based on gender. So like that was part of the pledge. Additionally, this is all voluntary, by the way. Festivals are expected to publicly release names of who is on the programming committees, like actually picking the films, and also to commit towards more inclusion of inclusive appointments in the institution itself or the leadership. So as a part of the pledge, we have the ceremony where Fremont is signing it. You have other international festival leaders who are doing this throughout the year. So on the one hand, Cannes Festival leadership volunteering to sign the pledge, it seems on the surface that it's a pressure point at a key moment. So this is something. So in 2019, Ken actually began to release a list of the selection committee for the first time. So the people who are actually making decisions along with him on what films will be programmed. So there is a level of transparency that's happening that has not happened before. And that 8-person team is now 50% women, so it's half and half. how the decision making and the inner workings of the Canada's institution is being shrouded in mystery is very much part of their brand. So like in Toronto and in Sundance, it very publicly they announce, like you see who the programmers are. The programmers write their programming notes in the Toronto, the TIFF like program every year. It's like it's part of the way that they get people to see the movies. So Programming Pledge, on the other hand, did not require festivals to really do anything. It didn't require them to kind of change the gender equity numbers in programming. And Fremont reiterated in the following year at a press conference that he's not implementing quotas, that he has no desire to do that. Quote, no one's asked me to have 50% of films made by women. That would show a lack of respect, end quote. So the external pressure coming from these industry groups and key industry players operates largely symbolically and provides international festivals with the appearance of taking action, while running the festival largely business as usual. So in conclusion, y'all can't see those numbers now. Yeah, good enough. Where are we now? This is the question, big question I'm asking. This is the big question as I'm trying to finish the conclusion of the book, I keep asking myself, because we've made some movement, some pressure points have happened, some things have changed, and still a lot has not. And I think the implications are really still unfolding. And it's really hard to separate out kind of as this was the equity movement or the pressure for film festivals is happening just as the pandemic hit. And so we find, as we all know, in spring of 2020, a number of film festivals had canceled, like South by Southwest was canceled, Telluride was canceled, Sundance, Cannes, Toronto went virtual. So this momentum for gender inclusion at all levels of festival operations and culture building in the late 2010s. The future of the film festival circuit at large really remains uncertain. Like the entire business of film festivals remains uncertain, not just whether or not this kind of pressure for more equity will continue. Prior to the pandemic, major international festivals had been inching towards better gender parity in their programming numbers. So we have on top right, French filmmaker Mathilde Diop's Atlantique became the first film by a Black female director ever selected for any competition. I'm gonna say that again. In 2019, Atlantique became the first film by a Black female director ever selected for in competition at Cannes. Women held 4 of the 19 films in competition that year. So that's where we're at. We're sitting around 4. Only 28% of the 69, like all the films selected for Cannes programming in different categories. So the in-person event resumed in 2021. You have 4 female directed films, feature the top category, Bergman Island, The Divide, Mia Hansen Love, The Divide, Catherine Corsini, The Story of My Wife, El Dico Iñieti, Titan, Julia Ducournau. So they matched the pre-2019 numbers, but we haven't really gone anywhere in there. One thing that here we say is there are the second women to win the Palme d'Or that was not honorary in 2021 for Titan, a provocative and visceral French-Belgian co-production thriller. Has anybody seen it? It's hard to describe. About a woman with a titanium plate in her head and compulsions for cars and murder. Became only the second, it's wild, you'll have to see it. Became the only second female directed film to win the Palme d'Or. On the one hand, this is a significant win, with the festival still grappling with gender disparities and leadership ranks in programming. The film came with a distribution deal in hand already, though. After Neon acquired it from North American rights, for example, that's one part of the world that we already had distribution for, the September prior to the festival. The award and the buzz gave the film a boost during its limited theatrical run and digital release later that year, so that's something. But on the other hand, the competition category included a total of 24 films with only 4, 16% held by women. 3 out of the 4 female directors were white French women. French filmmaker Ducournau was, my French is terrible, so I'm sorry. It was in Portuguese, I got that. Was a known quantity since her previous work, her short film Junior in 2011, her first feature Raw 2016, had already actually appeared in parallel sections or categories of Cannes. The programming committee's gesture towards gender disparity clearly has its limits at this point, particularly on whom is included and from where. So parity is not just a problem exclusive to Cannes. Screen Daily just released this great report. I have a lot of problems with this, with the data-driven studies. We can get into that in Q&A, particularly since they're conflating like all women, all Asian directors, like the flattening of these kind of like diversity and intersectionality in these studies drives me crazy. But you can see that all of these festivals have problems in terms of their inclusive programming. As the headline indicates, Black directors make just 1% of competition films at the major festivals. The acceptance rates for Black, MENA or MENA is Middle Eastern, North African, and Asian directors, their numbers are even worse. The fact that Latinx and Latin American filmmakers not even a category on this chart, that's another thing that makes me crazy, is even more telling, whereas this absent reinforces an entire diverse group region among that are still among the lowest acceptances to international film festivals. So unlike the 2010s promising pressure points around film festivals, and despite the short-term improvements for women filmmakers at the start of the 2020s, there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. We just started. Not only specifically around gender, but also marginalized and underrepresented groups in general. So as major international film festivals grapple with rebuilding and adapting to a post-pandemic future, gender equity and other intersectional inclusive practices will demand further energy and attention. Thank you.
Great timing. Thank you for this very illuminating and entertaining talk, certainly. Now let's open the floor to questions.
Who's moderating? So I'm just.
This was a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much for this. I have a question about Kate Blanchett. She seems to be the in front of the camera talent sort of pinnacle of this movement post Me Too, and the sort of the spearheading of this movement of women directors and producers. And I'm wondering if you can elaborate on why it's an actor that's sort of being given this added pressure to sort of speak for and on behalf of women directors and women producers and others who are at the center of this discourse.
That's an interesting question. I mean, I can give Time's Up as an example, and watching that kind of implode in the past year has also been really illuminating. And the figures who were on the board of that organization or who were advisors were Eva Longoria, who's now now a director and produces. But you have like America Ferreira. Who else did we have? Reese Witherspoon. You have the talent at a certain level who have the leverage and the press attention, and I think they're using it and they're using it in a way that I don't think that female directors are able, or at least many of them are not. Like Ava DuVernay is able to do this, right? So I think it's just using their press and their power, perhaps. The question is, how far does it go, right? Like are they symbolically doing this? You have, for example, like one thing that's happening in Cannes that I didn't mention in here is, like, for example, Jessica Chastain is also very vocal and as part of this, and was part of Time's Up and prior to it imploding. She made this very showy press conference I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago, for the film that just came out called The 355. And The 355 was supposed to be this big blockbuster that was produced by women, starring an international diverse female cast. They took it to Cannes, they did a whole presentation because they were trying to get financing for it. It sold Universal and made a lot of for distribution. It had been highly anticipated for a while. So I think that in many ways, you have women who are real, and this is not new. A lot of people have written about this in the media industries. Hollywood of female actresses who have power as producers as well. That's how they get power, is through producing or through deals or things like that. So I think that it's using that leverage. Yeah, and moving those places. I don't know if that's answering your question, but it's an interesting question.
Very good.
I wonder, thank you for this talk. It was really great. The topic's so interesting, and something I've been thinking about in my own way a lot. So I'm really excited as well. I'm wondering if there's any like attempts by Time's Up before this like last year or any kind of advocate groups or whatever to like talk to the accrediting body that you mentioned that like ranks these festivals as like individualized organization with which to confront rather than the separate festivals that actually owe these advocates kind of nothing.
Yeah, that's a good question. I know that other film festival scholars have spent time doing work on the accrediting body. They have little to no power. They haven't, I mean, they are just like a symbolic body that ranks, and you go to their website and you can tell. Like you can tell by their website and how like dated it is. So they don't have much sway over these festivals in that kind of way. Yeah. And the festivals, they are really, really autonomous in the way that they run and program. What I didn't have as much time for is like, say, like, for example, Ken is like very against this. TIFF, the Toronto National Film Festival itself is much more like internally and externally addressing and working towards these issues, has worked really hard in terms of not only in terms of more inclusive leadership, in everything from programming to all year programming to like the film festivals to things like that. And so these festivals can do it, like they can actually do it, and smaller regional festivals are doing it in a better way. So like South by Southwest or Sundance has better numbers, way better numbers, and that's something that a lot of leadership has been working towards. So it seems like it's happening to happen at the institutional level. I mean, we're seeing that the pressure put on this pledge for this parity pledge didn't really do anything. Like it was just like, look what we're doing, we're trying, you know. So I wish the accrediting body had more power or sway of them, but they don't. Good question.
So I want to thank you for this. I love this. But I wanted to take you up on your offer earlier to talk more about the March to Film and like these conversations about quality that keep circulating. Like, what are some of the benchmarks that you were kind of picking up from your interviews as to what that?
Do you mean the film market? Like,
Yeah, the film and
Yeah.
the film market in terms of like these buyers and sellers. How are they framing quality? What does that mean? What sort of things are you hearing?
Yeah, so I mean, this is an area that I've been dabbling in for a while now, and I don't know, I need to write something more extensively about the film markets. I've interviewed a lot of international sales agents, and like if y'all aren't familiar with sales agents, what they do is they represent a film. They represent a film, and they are basically trying to sell the rights for that film to distributors in different markets around the world. So a lot of times independent films or international films. So for example, I know of an international sales agent who would talk about like when you're meeting with a bunch of different Japanese distributors, what you're kind of pitching them and how you pitch things is very, very different than, say, for example, when you're talking to German or French distributors, and kind of like these, so like the conversations about genre, target audience, what's topical, what translates, and that's part of it as well. And so I think that like the problem is that that can get wrapped up in as well as these kind of biases and valuations around gender, race, sexuality, things like that. And so a lot of that can kind of get conflated in there as well. But yeah, so the film market's fascinating. Like if y'all have never been to like a TV or film trade show before, it's just booth after booth after booth. People taking meetings in front. I mean, I was watching people pitch people like in just like in front of you. But like the real top tier distributors or like the real big deals, that's happening behind closed doors. You don't know any of that's happening. So all this is happening in terms of films that are trying to get financing, films that are trying to get distribution. I think I'm answering your question, but I can talk to you about the film market forever. Like it's such a wild place. So it really depends on what sales agent you're talking to, and then also what like who they represent, what types of films they represent versus like the distributor you're talking to and what kind of films they're looking for. So the acquisition versus the sales versus the acquisition process is really fascinating. And you talk to a Canadian sales company, they're going to have a very different perspective about what they're selling versus like a Canadian distributor or something.
Go ahead. Thanks, Courtney. I can say this is certainly passes you like you passed your dissertation.
Yay! Finally,
Oh, you've been gone now.
10 years.
10 years.
Yeah.
This is kind of an unfair question. As I'm sitting here, you made the analogy to sports. And I'm thinking about the NFL's attempt to make equity in race relations and the most recent suit by Flores about these fake interviews and then not getting.
Like the Rooney Rule?
Yes. the
Okay,
Rooney
mhm.
Rule. And so, organizations set up rules to try to look like they're doing the right thing. You have any instance where any of this worked?
That's the question of,
I'm really serious.
no, I know you are. And that's the question, that's the question of my book, right? Of like, what are the problems and is it working anywhere? And it depends on what sector you're talking about. Like, are we talking about the development phase? Are we talking about on set, like talking to people on set? Like, are we talking about the festival? But for the festival world, I can tell you who's doing a good job, like who's doing a better job. Like Sundance Sundance has been actively doing this for a while and they're doing a better job. Toronto's doing a better job because they have people who are specifically like from internally. I don't know if you'd say they would never say we have a mandate for this, but they clearly have, like, in terms of everything from their leadership to who's on the programming, who's on the programming committees. If you look at I would say if you looked at the Sundance program for this year, the number of women and women of color, it's better than the other, like the A-list festivals.
It isn't fair to ask you, but it might be worth keeping an eye out for other industries where things have improved and how they manage to improve it.
Well, yeah, like there are European film industries that have, like Sweden's done a great job.
I'm talking about tech industries. I'm talking about every industry has the same sorts of problems.
Yeah.
That's why I went to the NFL. The point is, this is not just a problem of obviously film in the industry, it's a problem across the.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I don't think critical race theory and hope. It's upset.
And just to jump in, it's to follow up on Janet's question, the difference in the NFL and the NBA, and how do you explain that? Where there are so many black coaches in the NBA and there are no black coaches in the NFL. How does that happen? And is it organic? Is it internal? Is it bottom up? How does that happen? And why hasn't it happened? And you do a really nice job in your conclusion where you veer off into streaming.
I know.
So what about maybe riff on that a little bit? Just and research, et cetera. Something seems to be happening now. How do you explain that?
I will to say that for the legacy studios, some are doing better than others. Like Universal's doing better. Sony somewhat, Paramount somewhat, Disney, I don't even want to touch that right now. But for streaming, yes, we're seeing better numbers. If you just look at the numbers, I'm always very suspicious about the numbers and how, because they're not releasing they're not releasing their data. And so it's very like, how do you trust these numbers? Don't trust any numbers ever. But like, yes, on the surface, like Netflix or some of the new platforms coming from the legacy studios are doing better, right? Like we're seeing some opportunities for established female creators. We're seeing some opportunities for new female directors or creators. But I'm really wary to like say, yay, y'all did it, y'all fixed it, because giving Shonda Rhimes how $300 million, like I'm just real suspicious of that. Like, I don't know if y'all saw that Inventing Anna, but like the thing is, I think we have to be careful with saying that they're going to disrupt everything. One, we have to be careful that they're going to disrupt everything. Two, I think that the streamers, for the most part, are just taking people who've already been established through traditional pipelines and giving them deals. And I also really worry about, and this has been happening for a long time, and another side project I want to get into is kind of like the death of the mid-budget project and how so many female filmmakers, I guess I did deal with this in the book some, so many female filmmakers, that is their bread and butter, that's how they got jobs, that's what the rom-com was. Like I mean, we wouldn't have Gina Prince Bythewood, we wouldn't have like Nora Ephron, we wouldn't have a number of filmmakers who started in these kind of these mid-budget spaces. So what's happening in this like collapse of theatrical and streaming, and then the mid-budget kind of female-driven targeted projects are now going to the streamers, but are they being valued in the same way? Are they just being like dumped and lost? I'm not going to say that J-Lo movie was good because I haven't seen it, but I appreciate Jennifer Lopez and it's Kat Cora? No, it's Coro. The director who are trying to bring back the rom-com. I'm just going on a tangent on streamers, so. But yeah, I think yes, there are more opportunities. There are more spaces for content, but I think that how that's being valued and like, are they able to build sustainable careers from it is the question. And I think it's too soon to tell.
Shanti and Noah and then Edison.
Thank you, Courtney. Really enjoyed it. And again, I'll also give you a very high pass.
Yay! Such a relief.
It's not here.
So my question is about this term that you keep bringing up, this special value, right? So one could argue that these film festivals have no value.
Yeah.
Right? In the sense of that kind of prestige. It's like, swirls of paint on high art, nobody cares about, except those who have the millions to pay for it. I think that there are parallels here. But I do think that the value of these festivals, particularly for the kinds of concerns that we're talking about, should be happening at the margins, right? I'm curious if you spoke to people like those people that you were talking about, who are not in the A-listers, A-list club, but others hanging around, doing deals, who are participating in the value chain, maybe even kind of through some reflected glory. But is there something happening there that might be worthy of consideration beyond this kind of, artificial value that this little club builds for itself?
I don't know if it's completely artificial. I mean, there are real world ramifications of these films. Yeah, right. Like the distribution, they go into theaters, they, there's a lot of like work along the way, right? And the release and of these films. This is such a Shanti question. Like, oh my God. So you're asking like the people along the margins who are still part of the value system, like what, like particularly like looking at them and kind of how they're operating in this spaces, or
and then how they may even move up or down or laterally, or I'm just curious because you were talking about those people who are standing there and teaching their story, right? Yeah. So I'm just curious if that value has some value.
Oh, because they're in those spaces at all.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like, and I say this when I'm talking, like the people that I interview mostly for my book are emerging to established women working above the line. So they may be 5 years out of college, or like late 20s or something, all the way into their like late 40s. And so the fact that like a couple of producers who are struggling have even had films in Sundance or at Cannes or whatever, like in sidebars, like these smaller categories, they're still in the game, right? They're still in this value system. But I think the problem is that, I mean, on one hand, there's this one of the parts I didn't talk about today was what we're seeing with women who are still participating in this value system we're seeing like a number, still not all, but most are still experiencing what we call like a post-festival chasm, where like they may be able to get one film in or two films in, but they're not able to get they don't get the best distribution deal. They don't get to turn around and get a development deal with HBO immediately. Like they're not getting the opportunities, and so I'm thinking of more like a long-term, like in the short term, this is great, but it doesn't guarantee anything in the long term for anybody. But definitely we're seeing mostly women who are unable to like make the next step to like take it anywhere. And so that's interesting to me. On the other hand, what I didn't talk about was, and I want to do something with at some point, was international sales agents. A number of ones of a certain I say of a certain generation, who started in the 80s and 90s, a number of the international sales agents I talked to were women and women working in these spaces. And that was fascinating because so many of them were like, oh, there's not a gender problem. No, like, and so they were generationally speaking, very so deep in the system in terms of like the way that they were like selling and like the way that they were operating in the market, that they used their own like presence there as proof that there was no problem. And so like I had a harder time getting people to like see the gray area. I know this does not answer your question, but yes, and this is kind of like, this was the struggle for me with this project. Like, how do I balance the big picture structural like story about what's happening in the industry discursively with the people I'm talking to on the ground, most of whom you've never heard of, and how they're kind of participating in these systems and the challenges they're having, or the good things that, you know, or the success that they're having in them.
This is wonderful, Courtney. This really resonates with many of the studies conducted in the tech industry.
Yep.
Like a female entrepreneur can have the same network, but in a much disadvantaged position to generate resources, mobilize resources from the same network. They may receive the same award, but they have a much more difficult time to convert that reward or award into something concrete down the road.
Yeah.
To really make it a career defining moment. I think Noah is next, and then Alisa, and then Joe.
Thank you very much for your wonderful talk. I can't weigh in on the high for my time. I don't see terribly well. And at one point you had slides, you had, I think, Cannes, you had Venice, and then you had the Berlinale also up there. I wanted to cast an eye back across the Atlantic if I could. And the Berlin International Film Festival is one that I've attended quite regularly and then also watched.
They're doing a good job.
I was curious about that. I was also curious about Rotterdam, about the Vienna. You mentioned, you know, how Sundance, South by, they're making strides. Are there equivalent festivals? You mentioned what's happening, but more egalitarian. I spent my teens in Sweden.
Oh, yeah, see, yeah.
It makes sense. Sweden is
It's baked into the culture and the
Right.
parliament and all of it.
It makes complete sense.
Yeah.
What about Rotterdam, the Biennale, and Vienna? Are there other places that are leading the pack, or at least not so? I think the figures you gave since 46 at Cannes, what was it, 1,500 to 86, I think is the disparity.
82 to 1688. Yeah.
So,
Berlinale, the Berlin is doing much better. But I also would say, like, and then when I did something I don't get into because I don't have the time, and film festival scholars have already talked about this extensively, was like, what is a film that shows at Berlin? What is a film that shows at Cannes? What's a film that shows at Toronto? Because they're all different. They all have their kind of brands and and I would say, I mean, out of all of them, like Berlinale is like the one that I really embraces, I think, I hate to say like European art cinema, but like just general international art cinema more. I think it's the films are much more like challenging and interesting. And I think that, yes, they're doing a better job. Like I would say the numbers have increased a lot since the 2010s in terms of equity, particularly in terms of that. I've talked to some folks who have been in their like producers program there and done the market there, who've had really good experiences, like women in that as well. I don't spend as much time talking about that festival, and I definitely do. I do not talk about Rotterdam, which is like a whole kind of another thing as well. And I'm not as familiar with the Rotterdam numbers, but I think that's like definitely a great question and worth comparing, right? In terms of traditions of these festivals, and also like how far is Hollywood ingrained in these? Like, and so like with Cannes, it's like from the beginning. You look at pictures from the 50s and you see like all these starlets on the beach. Like the festivals that are like interdependent, like Cannes like depends on its relationship with Hollywood in a way. I don't think it does in the same way with Berlin. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say.
Yeah.
Is there another chapter in the book where you examine some of the smaller festivals, or is
No, but I could do that. I could do that in the future. No, Tom, no more chapters. No, but well, I did follow that Los Angeles Film Festival, and I was talking to folks who ran that, and I was going to use that as a case study. And then, because it's associated with a Film Independent, which is a nonprofit, very, very important nonprofit organization that finances, they have labs, they do all kinds of development stuff. They're the ones who do the Independent Spirit Awards. So they've had the Los Angeles Film Festival for a while. They decided it wasn't worth the money, and they like closed it a couple of years ago. And their numbers had been amazing in terms of like female directors, directors of color, in terms of that it just, the organization didn't think it was financially feasible anymore. So you have something that they've made so much progress and they've done something that was a small LA-based festival, and it was just done. And it was like overnight, they're like, we're closing. So that's a case of like success and failure, but on a smaller scale. But no, I don't, but that's a good question.
Thanks again. For
Yeah.
that.
I would say, I mean, you probably know Scotty, but Scotty Lois has done like really great, like doing amazing work on film festivals right now. And especially like on a more like big picture quantitative, like how do we like, and so I saw a presentation that she did with another scholar. Apologize that I can't remember her name at the time, but it's looking at kind of like the macro of festivals. And so I think there's much more dynamic work happening that out there that I'm not doing in that area.
Yeah, and I think even just eyeballing your table here is actually support what you just shared. Like seems that the smaller festivals are doing a little bit better than the three A-level European festivals.
I mean, the fact that the 3 A levels are like Western European, but I mean, like all of this is just like very frustrating, right? Like where are the power, like what other festivals around the world, what are the region markets around the world we're talking about? So like we're only talking about these 3 European festivals is also, I realize, like what we're doing here as like as a first and foremost, like somebody who works in Latin America, like, like I see that this in itself is like a problem.
Elisa and Joe, and then we have one question from Zoom.
Well, thank you, Courtney. I'm glad I got to get a little taste of what your book project is about, and I look forward to seeing the rest go to press really soon.
Me too.
So I have a question about methods, just because in my grad class yesterday, we were talking about interviewing industry professionals, and there was a lot of anxiety about that from grad students about whether or not they'd be able to get that access. And so I'm wondering, especially because I've known you have done this since your grad career, if you can sort of give advice or recommendations about that.
Yeah, I love it. I'm a methods nerd. I tell anybody who wants to talk about methods, like I will talk to you for hours. So I would say that it was a lot of trial and error. Joe was hugely influential in terms of like how I learned to do field work. Because like the first time I went to Brazil was on a trip that he took a group of grad and undergrad students to. So I learned to do field work as a master's student. I learned to do interviews as a PhD student. I mean, I was like on the newspaper in high school, like that kind of stuff. But like other than that, I did not have interview experience. And so it was a lot of trial and error. And I remember actually Janet had gotten me in touch with, I think it was a friend or a former student who'd had a sibling that worked at Sony Pictures Classics. I can't remember the connection. And so it was the first person I had. My dissertation was on Sony. I was looking at their international offices and in Europe and Brazil. No, this is the dissertation. I was looking at Sony in Brazil and Spain, giving kind of like comparing the 2 international offices and how they approach local language productions. And I had cold emailed this person who I'd gotten the contact to. And I just sent this long rambling email about my dissertation. And the guy was like, I can't help you. Well, I don't know what you need from me. So that's my failure. So from there, I learned you just have to like keep it short, keep it simple, and don't be afraid to hear no. And like, do not be afraid to hear no. Ask anybody you know for contacts. Like Twitter has been amazing, DMing people. Going to film festivals, I've gotten a lot of contacts that way. I've gotten a lot of contacts through other friends. But yeah, like reaching out to people on LinkedIn, I know is an option. I don't do that as much usually. It's like social media or whatever. You just have to start. Like you have to start and ask people, and like you need an elevator pitch. Like you need to be able to, like even if you've never worked in the industry, which I did some volunteering for film festivals before my PhD or during my PhD. But like just keep it short and simple. Be able to have a very like one sentence. This is why project is. This is why I want to talk to you. Always compliment them and just say like you're whatever. Like I'm not telling you to be disingenuous, but I am a Texan and I definitely was raised to be like, you catch a lot of flies with honey. So you're just like, your perspective is really important, and it's true, it may or may not be, but you, in your mind, your perspective be really important for my project. I really would love to talk to you. That's my personality. You can find your own personality, but in terms of this, but I think you just have to try, right? Like, and then ask a bunch of people how they did it and some of their challenges. Like Michael Curtin gave me the best advice ever when I was doing dissertation field work. And it was like, ask them about their competition. I went, oh, okay. So it opened, I mean, and so I just started telling, and so what I thought was, I'm going to tell them I'm not my competition. So I always make it very clear at the beginning, like, I'm not a journalist. I'm not here to get a headline. I'm not here to like be salacious or whatever, I'm here because I want to know what you do, and what you do is valuable. And a lot of people don't know about what you do. I mean, I was talking to a bunch of people in middle management distribution, which people never even did, but it worked. So I don't know. I'd ask every media industry scholar who's done interviews, and ask them how they did it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful, Joe.
Actually, I just want to emphasize something she just said, that trick of emphasizing why you think they're important and why what they have to say is important. That'll open up a lot of doors.
I'm pretty sure I learned that from you.
Well, I hope so. Yeah, that's been a long time trick of
But
mine.
it
for
works
sure.
really well. And like, yeah, and I don't know. I could talk about this forever, and I don't want to bore y'all. But I mean, it's easier and harder now. Like, it's harder for me because I can't be around people and network in that way, but it's easier because more people are willing to hop on Zoom with me or DM them on Twitter or something. But you know what? I tried message like 10 journalists who I quoted throughout my book, and like 9 of them did not respond. So, whatever.
Right, now I do have a question I want to ask you. Well, the first thing that you mentioned when you started talking about women getting power in a more real way was essentially actresses sliding over into being producers.
Yes.
So there's a kind of, I don't want to use the word beauty exactly, but fame and symbolic capital there
Yes.
that can be converted.
Yes.
So now, do you see that as opening any doors, or is that just a really exclusive path?
I mean, it depends on what kind of projects they're working on. They're like, how much are they paid? Like, they're paid. Who's their network? Like, what is their track record? Who do they know? But if you're talking about like, if you want to be working on projects that are meaningful to you and you have creative control over, you have to be behind the camera in some way. Like, unless you have to have your hands, or be so powerful that you're Tom Cruise and you're telling people Paramount's basically like held back all his movies so they could be theatrical this year. Like, so yes, that power is, I talk a little bit about Reese Witherspoon in the conclusion, because I'm kind of fascinated by her in terms of, she was in the industry A-list for a long time. She moves into producing. She's echoing in interviews the same kind of challenges and dismissive kind of valuations about that other women I know have taught, like independent filmmakers are having. So she's saying the same things, like they don't believe I can do this, I don't have enough experience, whatever that they're saying. And then what she's been able to do with her company is really fascinating, and I want to talk to everybody at her company because I'm curious about that as well. But a lot of it has to do with like, how do you get the power to be able to call the shots, like in terms of hiring, in terms of final cut, in terms of the way it's being marketed, who you end up selling your film to. Like, do you have that kind of power? And you're not going to have that in front of this camera only, like, unless you're, a lot of it has to do with like contracts and all that other stuff that I actually don't get into in terms of talent, because I'm not really talking about on-screen talent in the book much.
Okay, one quick follow-up. So when somebody gains some beginning power like that, are they using it then to open the door for other women behind the camera?
Good question. Some yes, some no. Ava DuVernay is a perfect example of this as a director who has been pulling people up with her as she's moved up the budget, right? Like, in terms of the budget she's making, in terms of people who are getting hired. There are definitely people that are pulling, and that's the question, right? Like, can you do that? Can you pull people up with you, and will you? And I think we're seeing more of that. But I guess the question is, who are you pulling up with you? One of the complaints, or one of the criticisms, and one of the kind of the tensions in the book that I was hearing from independent producers were, I'm producing this film for this first-time filmmaker, typically a white man. He has a hit at Sundance. There's no reciprocity. He moves up. I go nowhere. He gets the success. He gets the value from the festival. I'm still struggling trying to make a movie at the same budget. And then I have folks in the development side saying, well, that's not how that works. Like if he gets meetings with a studio and he's doing a studio project, you typically don't bring your producer with you because they don't know how to play in this pool because it's a much bigger pool. Whereas, like he reminds me of myself kind of thing, like that the men are being plucked up, in a way that the women are not. And that's one of the complaints I've heard. I think that answers your question.
Yeah.
So we have our last question from Zoom, from Brad Limo. Thank you for your patience. So we will just channel Brad for a while. In terms of writing processes, did you look into representation in any of the training camps or funding platforms as the big three, Sundance and Toronto
Wait, did I look at the training?
camps?
Oh, you mean like the development labs? No, and that is something that I need to do. Like Berlinale does that really well. Sundance also. That's a whole nother area that I just couldn't do it. But it's an area that needs to be looked at because a number of the women that I talked to who had films at Sundance, their scripts had gone through writing labs. They'd gone through producing labs. They'd already been vetted by Sundance in a certain way. They'd already had their projects. I talked to a producer who had worked with a first-time filmmaker who she actually ran the producing lab at Film Independent. And I talked to her for a while about that. And about how important these are for workshopping and for kind of moving projects and people up into the pipeline. So they are an important part of it. It's just something I didn't get a chance to get to in the book.
Wonderful.
I'd like to look at the long-term effects of these programs and how they differ, but that would be a whole project.
Great. So we got a little bit over time, but not too much. I gave Courtney another